ग्रुपवर टाकलंयस ना सकाळी?
हो सर, आता परत टाकलं.
भालदार चोपदार सगळेजण लागतात खासदारांना बरं का.
रेकॉर्डिंग सुरू झाले सर.
बालदार सुद्धा नाही, आपण आहे 3.5 माणसं त्यात सगळ्यांनी असायला पाहिजे. ते आपण फिजिकल प्रोग्रामला नाही का सगळे एकत्र असतो, तसं इट इज व्हर्च्युअल ला सुद्धा एकत्र असायला पाहिजे.
गुड आफ्टरनून सगळ्यांना.
गुड आफ्टरनून.
हॅलो.
हॅलो
सर, फोटो चांगले आलेत कार्यक्रम.
फोटो चांगले आहेत. हो,
कुठले जे फोटो?
थॅलेसेमिया डे सेलिब्रेशन त्याच टाकतो ग्रुपवर.
आज काय केली ऍक्टिव्हिटी?
काय
ऍक्टिव्हिटी काय केली आज?
नाही, थॅलेसेमियाच्या पेशंट्स आणि पॅरेंट्सची चर्चा, त्यांचे प्रॉब्लेम्स, हाऊ वी कॅन सॉर्ट देम आउट, अँड थोडंसं छोटंसं गिफ्ट त्यांना
अच्छा.
थॅलेसेमिया पेशंट्सना.
किती आहेत तुमच्याकडे थॅलेसेमिक्स?
आमच्याकडे टोटल 32 ते 35 आहेत रेग्युलर येणारे.
अच्छा.
सर, मला वाटतं आपण सुरू करूयात. मोर दॅन 30 पीपल हॅव जॉईन.
अरे वा.
So on behalf of Indian Academy of Pediatrics Pune branch, I would like to welcome everyone with a warm good afternoon. We have joined this session today on occasion of World Thalassemia Day, which is celebrated every year on 8th of May. And the idea is to spread awareness about thalassemia and learn more about this disease so that we'll be better equipped to tackle the situation regarding as far as thalassemia is concerned. For today's session, the chairperson for the session will be Dr. Anand Deshpande sir. He is the executive board member for Central IIP for 2021 and a senior pediatrician from Pune attached to Dinanath Mangeshkar Hospital as consultant. So I request Dr. Anand Deshpande to please take over the proceedings.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Sanjay, for giving me this opportunity to speak on as a chair, remain as a chairman for this event. World Thalassemia Day is a concept of basically Thalassemia International Federation Foundation. This is not found by any UNICEF or UNESCO or any big body. This is a non-profit, non-government, patient-driven organization. Thalassemia International Federation, and they have started the concept of celebrating the one day for the awareness. And this year, most important is IIP was not having IIP celebrates so many days, but unfortunately IIP was not celebrating, or we should not call celebration. Actually, there is no celebration in thalassemia, but was not doing the Thalassemia Day. So there is one of the IAPN, Dr. Karlekar from Parbhani, who has been doing work on his own in his local area in prevention of the thalassemia for years together. So he requested all the EB members, he requested me. So then we took it to the president and secretary, and immediately it was sanctioned in the EB of February. So this is the first year where Central IIP has declared it as a Thalassemia Day to be done. Thalassemia, I tried to take out some statistics on for this day. We don't have any figure whether the number of cases of thalassemia in India are going down or going up. We don't have any statistics. I discussed with Dr. Karlekar also, who is working in this field. Approximately, we add 10,000 thalassemics per year in India. There are few countries who have stopped thalassemia to zero. The one of the country that named Cyprus, very small country, but it has achieved long back, maybe in the 80s, thalassemia-free country. It is theoretically, it is very much possible because this is a disease with a autosomal recessive disease, and if the two carriers don't marry each other, then major load of the disease will disappear. But it remains only in theory, and we are unable to reduce the thalassemia load. There are several remedies have been told that when adolescents or while going to college, everyone should have trait estimation of the thal trait, but it has not been done, and such a preventable disease we are unable to prevent, which takes a lot of toll on our economy, on our parents' mind and their energy economy. The family economy is totally disturbed, even the government has given concession. So let us hear about newer advances in the thalassemia, as well as any preventive measures in thalassemia from our own very eminent speaker and the actual field worker, Dr. Shailesh Kanvinde. I don't think that I need to introduce Shailesh Kanvinde to this august audience. He has been here in Pune. He is the first pediatric oncologist, hemato-oncologist of Pune. I think he's almost practicing for more than 22 years in Pune. And he has several books, book contributions, several articles published. And he is completely devoted to the pediatric onco and hemato, not doing any general pediatric work. Let's hear from him what is new, and let us become a little more wiser about thalassemia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deshpande, for the kind introduction. Thanks, Dr. Nathu and the IIP Pune team for giving me this opportunity. As highlighted by Dr. Deshpande, today being World Thalassemia Day, one needs to do our utmost to create awareness about the various treatment strategies for this disease, as well as how we can prevent thalassemia from the incidence of thalassemia from occurring in our country. So I'll just start with my screen share. Is it visible?
Yes, sir, it is.
Yeah, okay, so I'll proceed. So basically, in my talk, I'm going to focus on the current concepts in the management of thalassemia. Aspects regarding prevention we could bring out in discussion post the talk. So as you know, the thalassemia mutation can be inherited either in the heterozygous state or in a double heterozygous or homozygous state. And depending on the various co-inherited mutations, various clinical phenotypes are produced. Right from thalassemia major, which is a most severe phenotype, and thalassemia intermedia, minor. And there is also another condition called as a silent carrier. These children are phenotypically normal. They have normal hemoglobins. They have no microcytosis, hypochromia, HbA2, which is a feature of thal trait, is also absent in these children. And they have some very peculiar mutations. And hence they are not picked up on a regular screening. They are only brought to notice when a silent carrier mutation is inherited with another beta thal mutation, and these children can then develop thalassemia intermedia. As you can see here, I'm not going to go into the details on the right side. Various co-inheritance with either alpha thalassemia or with triplicated alpha genes or with other abnormal hemoglobins. One could have various phenotypes which could range from major, intermedia, or minor. So the basic pathophysiology in any thalassemia is decrease in a particular globin chain. So in alpha thalassemia, it's a decreased alpha chains. It's in beta thalassemia, it's decreased beta globin chains. Okay. As a result of a decrease in the beta globin chains, there is excess free alpha chains in the RBCs and in the precursors, which leads to damage to those cells, leading to hemolysis and ineffective erythropoiesis, both contributing to the anemia which these patients have. As a result of the anemia, they'll end up with having splenomegaly. The anemia as well as the ineffective erythropoiesis contribute to the erythroid marrow expansion, which is typically seen in poorly transfused thalassemics. You can see the enlargement of the facial bones, the skull bones, and so on. This leads to the skeletal deformities and osteopenia that we see in thalassemia. And this also contributes to iron overload that we'll see later. So the complications that we see in thalassemia may be because of the disease, maybe because of the blood transfusion, or maybe because of the chelation and other drugs that we use. Because of the disease, obviously there is chronic anemia. There is expansion of the marrow cavity, which, as I said, leads to the cosmetic deformity. In addition, it can cause dental problems and so on. The ineffective erythropoiesis contributes to the anemia as well as the expansion of the marrow cavity, but it also contributes to increased iron absorption from the gut, and which contributes to the iron overload. Blood transfusion, the main problem is iron overload. We've seen that iron overload with its disastrous effect on various organs in the body. Infections are less of a problem nowadays because of the good transfusion practices adopted by the blood banks, the screening practices, though that still could be a problem with the transfusion. So the principles of management consist of regular blood transfusions, adequate and proper iron chelation, detection, prevention, and management of the various complications which can occur, and the possibility of a bone marrow transplant in those who are eligible. Very often, even now, we do see patients of thalassemia who come to us at 10, 12, 15 years of age, who have just received transfusions in their entire life and have not been treated or not been offered any other form of therapy which is present. And most of them have a very poor survival. And it is important to note that whenever we are managing thalassemics, we have to look at all these things and introduce them at the appropriate time. So what is the objective of a blood transfusion? It is not just to correct the anemia. The objective is also to suppress erythropoiesis. Because there is an ineffective erythropoiesis, because there is a expansion of the marrow cavity, unless we suppress erythropoiesis, unless we achieve a hemoglobin which is sufficient to suppress erythropoiesis, we will not be doing a complete job. Those children will then continue to have cosmetic deformities, will continue to have splenomegaly, and rarely some of them may even have extramedullary hematopoiesis in the form of masses, especially in the spinal cord or so, and those can present with paraparesis. So suppression of erythropoiesis is important. This is a little different from transfusion for other congenital hemolytic anemias where ineffective erythropoiesis is not present, say in hereditary spherocytosis. There the objective would just be to correct the anemia sufficient to achieve growth, as against in thalassemia where suppression of erythropoiesis is also one of the targets. So when
हेलो
रेंज के लिए बहुत एक्सपेंसिव
हाँ
Shailesh is
इसी
not
का
audible.
लॉस्ट कनेक्शन
देशपांडे सर सगळ्यांना 5 मिनिटात जॉईन होईल म्हणून सांगा
नाही सगळे जॉईन राहतील ना. त्याला त्याचं काहीतरी त्याचा लाईट आयदर लाईट्स गेले असतील किंवा काहीतरी गेलं असेल त्याच्याकडचे. आला.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes,
Sorry,
please.
I think there's something wrong. I logged out. Okay, so I'll continue.
Just share the screen, I think.
Oh.
Share the screen and थोड़ा सा louder बोल, थोड़ा loud बोल.
Okay, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so as I said, we will need to document a transfusion requirement. So we usually allow the hemoglobin to drop below 7 for 2 occasions. And then once that is documented, we then start a regular transfusion program. In addition, in those children whose hemoglobin doesn't drop below 7, I think there's something wrong with my internet connection. Just a minute, can I?
Give your mobile hotspot.
Yeah,
Mobile hotspot then.
Okay now?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Let's start. So do I would need to share my screen again?
Yes. Yeah,
Just make it full
it is
screen.
seen. It is seen, but
Yeah, you have to share again.
you share it again and go to slideshow.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So in those children whose hemoglobin is above 7, but we would try to avoid transfusions to see whether how they're tolerating, what is their growth. But in case they have facial changes, they have poor growth, if they have evidence of extramedullary hematopoiesis, these children then should be started on a transfusion program. Once we start transfusions, we would like to maintain it above 9 to 10. This usually promotes the normal growth, supports normal regular activity, and is adequate for marrow erythroid suppression. Higher levels may be required if there is evidence of cardiac disease or if we find evidence of inadequate marrow suppression. So for a short period of time, we may need to transfuse more in order to achieve the desired marrow suppression. Usually 15 to 20 cc per kg every 3 to 4 weekly is what is recommended. Blood which is less than 2 weeks old is desirable but not mandatory, but it's as desirable. Leukodepletion is important for those children who are candidates for transplant because that will reduce the sensitization, and also useful for patients who are developing transfusion reactions. The complications of transfusion obviously are, we've discussed that, iron overload, infections, and so on. So coming to the next part of the management, that is iron chelation. Normally, iron is transported in blood in association with transferrin, and transferrin is about 30% saturated. When the iron increases, the transfusion gets 100% saturated, and then the free excess iron is released in the blood, which is called a non-transferrin bound iron. This is toxic to various organs, as you can see here. So the iron overload mechanism of toxicity is basically the free NTBI, which causes free radical injury. In addition, because of the parenchymal ion loading, there is leakage of the hydrolytic enzymes from the lysosomes, which can also be toxic to the cells. So what are the sources of ion overload? You know, blood transfusion is not the only source. Blood transfusions will give about 0.7 milligram per ml of packed cells. That is the amount of ion transfused, which roughly translates into 0.3 to 0.6 milligram per kilogram per day of iron. But a significant amount of iron is absorbed even from the gut, and it could be about 0.1 milligram per kilogram per day. This could contribute to iron overload even in children who are not transfusion dependent. So non-transfusion dependent thalassemics can still be can still develop iron overload because of this mechanism. This source of iron absorption is reduced significantly if our transfusion program is good and we are maintaining a suitable hemoglobin. So how do we assess iron overload? Serum ferritin has been the mainstay. It is a very good indicator of iron status. It's easily available. It is useful. It can be done repeatedly and can be used for monitoring response to therapy. The most important thing when ordering a serum ferritin is that one should always insist for an accurate, exact value. Because most often labs report more than 1,000, more than 2,000, and so on. And that really doesn't help. And that we will not be able to monitor the iron status with a value like that. So always insist on an accurate or exact value. The problem with serum ferritin is that it is an acute phase reactant. So in any infections, inflammation, or in liver dysfunction, it is going to be higher and is not going to correlate with the iron overload. On the contrary, it can be low in vitamin C deficiency in patients of hypothyroidism and in conditions where the iron overload is not because or predominantly not because of blood transfusions, as in thalassemia intermedia. Liver biopsy, previously considered a gold standard. However, it's an invasive procedure. Very often we get a very small biopsy. The iron deposition may be patchy, and assessment in patients with cirrhosis could be difficult. Again, it's not something which we can do for serial monitoring. So, though it may be a good indicator of iron overload, it's not something which we routinely do in practice. We can estimate the total body iron based on what the liver iron content is, and the target liver iron would be less than 7 milligram per gram of liver dry weight, whereas those having 15 milligrams per gram are the ones with high risk of complications and death. We are now increasingly looking at the use of T2 star MRI for assessing iron overload, and it has been seen that with the T2 star relaxation time correlates significantly with what is the status of iron overload in that particular organ. The shorter the time, the more is the iron overload. It has been seen that those having a relaxation time of more than 10 milliseconds, the incidence of cardiac failure in the next 1 year is negligible, whereas those having a relaxation time less than 6 are the ones at very high risk. Almost 50 to 60% of them will end up with overt cardiac failure in the next 12 months. So this is not a very recent development, but we are the availability is recent as far as we are concerned. In the last couple of years, we have been having reliable access to this. It is highly reproducible, it is non-invasive, and we can do repeated longitudinal studies. So in addition to ferritin, this is a very, very important tool that we can use in practice to assess iron overload, especially knowing the limitations of ferritin in patients having liver disease and so on. So coming to chelation. So it is to be remembered that only a very small amount of storage iron is available at any time for chelation. So a longer exposure to the chelator rather than short courses of high doses will produce a better result. It is also to be remembered that iron is an important component of various vital cellular enzymes, and which could also be liable for chelation and cause problems with cellular metabolism. So we do not start chelation immediately at diagnosis of thalassemia, because at that time sufficient iron overload may not have occurred, and potential chelation of these iron associated with the enzymes may be a risk. So usually we start chelation after about 20 to 24 blood transfusions when the ferritin is consistently over 1000. These are some of the options that we have. Desferoxamine, the oldest agent present for the last 50 years. Problem, it has to be given as a subcute infusion requiring a pump. It has to be given daily or at least 5 to 7 days a week. And because of this, the compliance has been quite poor. Not many children tolerate it, not many like to use it. However, those who use it, this drug has really produced great results. Nowadays, we are not really using desferoxamine because of the other agents which are available. But there are some indications where we may need to use it, especially a 24-hour infusion, is those patients who present with cardiac dysfunction. This is one agent which, given as a 24-hour infusion, can really help us either alone or in combination with other agents to improve cardiac function in a short period of time. Deferriprone or Kelfor was the first oral agent available. It has been there now since for the last 20 years. It is an agent which is reasonably well tolerated. It has a better effect on chelating cardiac iron than the other agents. However, liver iron may increase on deferriprone monotherapy. Another problem with deferriprone was the side effects, which especially neutropenia and arthropathy, which prevented the regular use of this drug in about 25% of the patients who used it. So the remaining 75% tolerated it and definitely benefited by this agent, but about 25% had side effects, and all patients require strict monitoring to prevent neutropenia or to detect neutropenia. And if neutropenia occurs, this drug cannot be used in future. So the second agent which came in practice and now which has really changed the way we are using chelation nowadays is deferrasirox. It has it's a long half-life, so suitable for once a day dosing. Unlike deferriprone, which had a short half-life and required thrice a day dosing, so compliance with it was also a problem. Here, once a day dosing, the bland taste ensures that this drug is relatively well tolerated, and compliance with this drug is pretty good. Rash and elevated creatinine are some of the side effects. However, most of those can be tackled, and compliance and utilization of this drug is seen in most patients. So just to compare these drugs, you can see that desferoxamine has a short half-life and has to be given as a subcute infusion. It has a good effect on cardiac and a very good effect on chelating iron in the liver. Deferriprone, on the other hand, has a predominant effect on the cardiac iron, while deferrasirox is reasonably good in both these areas. Now, coming to combination therapy, when do we use combination therapy? Since nowadays we are not using desferoxamine, most of these indications are no longer valid. So currently our use of combination chemotherapy is for those children who are showing inadequate chelation with monotherapy, either deferriprone or with deferrasirox. It has been shown that combination chemotherapy produces faster and better iron chelation than monotherapy. However, there may be a slightly increased risk of side effects. Hence, combination therapy has not yet been considered standard of care, but it might in the near future. So the combination may be with desferoxamine with deferriprone, desferoxamine with deferrasirox. But most often, what we currently use is a combination of deferriprone and deferrasirox, both oral agents, and this is well tolerated, and it does give very good results. So we use this in select situations where, as we say, with single agent, we are not able to achieve a very good desired outcome. Before that, just one word about the other agents that we have. Deferrasirox is now also available as a film-coated tablet, which does not necessarily mean it has to be taken on an empty stomach. It can be taken anytime during the day, and that is a little better than the conventional deferrasirox. However, the efficacy-wise is the same. Cost is significantly higher. So currently, though it is available, it's not. We are not routinely using it. We're sticking to the conventional deferrasirox. This chart just shows the survival of thalassemics over a 30-year period, and we can see here initially when Cooley described the initial cases, the survival was less than 6 months because nobody really transfused them. And even today, if those children who of thalassemia who are not transfused will not have a survival expectancy of more than 6 to 12 months. Now, in the 60s, if you can see, the survival at end of the almost half the patients did not survive beyond 25 to 30 years of age. But with improvements in supportive care, improvements in transfusion practices, improvements in chelation, better management of complications, I think we, in the current era, this is still a very old slide, but even currently, a substantial number of thalassemics are expected to survive beyond the 4th and 5th decade. The major cause of mortality are cardiac disturbances, heart failure, arrhythmias. Infection in the past has been a major cause also, but as I said, with better transfusion practices and better screening and better tests, we can the incidence of infection as a cause of mortality would definitely go down. The third part, often neglected, is the prevention and management of other complications of thalassemia. And these are some of the common complications that we can face. Cardiac complication, that I said, is the major cause of mortality. Those children who do not receive adequate chelation rarely survive more than 15-20 years. And cardiac complications does become a problem beyond 15 years of age. We've seen the screening tools. Screening should begin after 10 years, usually after 10 years of age, at regular intervals. And as we've seen the prediction and the use of T2 star MRI in the current algorithm of our management. So what do we do if we detect a patient with a cardiac problem? The main thing is to intensify chelation. And actually here lies the problem. Because most children who present to us with cardiac problems today are the ones who cannot afford chelation or who have not been offered chelation so far. So intensifying chelation may be a problem in these kids, but that is probably the only option. Prognosis is generally poor if the cardiac failure has occurred, but significant improvement is possible with intensive chelation, requiring maybe even IV desferal for a short period of time. Liver disease, again, will be because of iron overload and maybe because of transfusion transmitted infections such as the hepatitis infections, and may manifest as hepatomegaly, liver fibrosis, and cirrhosis. These are some of the risk factors for successful, or rather, some of the factors that we consider in deciding what is the risk of a transplant. So liver disease does play an important role. Endocrine problems can also occur. They're also quite common. The most common are short stature and hypogonadism. As with most of the complications occurring in thalassemia, the causative factors include chronic anemia and iron overload. So similar for growth failure, it's long-standing chronic anemia contributes to the growth failure, and iron overload leading to endocrine disturbances will also contribute to growth failure. Beyond 10 years of age, I think endocrinologist is a very important member of the thalassemia treatment team. And patients would need to see an endocrinologist probably as often as they would meet a hematologist or a pediatrician. In the past, over enthusiastic chelation with desferoxamine. Many of our patients would self-dose themselves with higher doses of desferoxamine in an attempt to treat the higher ferritin levels which they had. And that led to desferoxamine does damage the cartilage plate and will cause growth retardation in these kids. So hypogonadism, pubertal delay is again, as I said, again because of both the factors of poor chelation and chronic anemia. Bone problems, as I said, the marrow expansion will lead to skull and face deformities, dental malocclusion, recurrent sinusitis. Osteoporosis is an important problem. Risk factors in addition to the previous mentioned as hypogonadism and diabetes, which these children, most of these problems will be seen in adolescents or older adults, may not be seen in very young children, but one needs to be aware that such things can happen. The patient need to be counseled and preventive strategies need to be done regarding the same. So for prevention and management, adequate exercise, ensuring vitamin D and calcium supplementation. Those with hypogonadism may need hormone replacement, and in some patients, bisphosphonates may also be required. So again, the endocrinologist plays an important role in the detection, elective detection and prevention and management of these problems. So what do we monitor? We monitor for adequacy of transfusion, we monitor for adequacy of chelation, and for presence of any complications. Adequacy of transfusion is monitored by carefully looking at the pre-transfusion hemoglobin, the degree of hepatosplenomegaly. Now, what has been seen is that children who are poorly transfused early in life develop big spleens, which later on are very difficult to suppress because by restoring adequate transfusion. So one should be very careful and ensure that patients do not develop splenomegaly by adequately transfusing them right from the beginning, because many of these children then land up with very huge spleens, they land up with hypersplenism and unfortunately face a splenectomy. In addition, we do viral screening every year. Those on chelation get their bilirubins, enzymes, and creatinine monitored every 3 to 4 monthly. And audiometry and ophthalmic evaluation is also necessary for those who are on chelation. Beyond 10 years of age, when one needs to monitor for cardiac disease, a careful clinical assessment for growth and development, and other endocrine problems periodically. So far, whatever we've discussed, obviously, is just sort of a mitigating treatment for thalassemia. It's not curative. The only currently available curative treatment is a hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. And there are various options as far as the donor is concerned. We currently recommend the standard of care is a matched sibling donor or a match related donor, which gives the best results. But unfortunately, only a 25% probability of finding a match in the family. A matched unrelated donor from one of the donor registries across the world is also an option. However, it's quite expensive. and it is definitely causes more complications and side effects than a related donor transplant, but that's still an option. Cord blood transplant is not very useful in thalassemics. Very high risk of graft failure, and usually cord blood transplants are useful for very young kids because the volume of the cord blood precludes using it for very older and children with a larger weight. We are currently also thinking about haploidentical transplants. There is a transplant with a 50% match. And there have been recent papers and data even from India, and this is from Thailand, which shows that haploidentical transplants may also be an option for those who lack a suitable match sibling donor. However, the treatment strategy is quite different, and the ICMR recommends or mentions haploidentical transplant as one of the clinical options for transplant of thalassemia. This will see a increase in the recent future because many many families have just a single child, and so the child may not have a donor, which is may not have a sibling donor, and hence haploidentical transplant may be the way to go forward. However, currently there is also a significant risk associated with haploidentical transplants, much more than that of a sibling donor transplant. And hence, if one needs to do an haploidentical transplant, adequate family counseling regarding the same should be done. As I said, how do you select patients for transplant? These are some of the risk factors which we consider: inadequate chelation, liver fibrosis, and hepatomegaly more than 2 centimeters are independent risk factors for failure of transplant or having a complication in transplant. And class 1 transplants are those with no risk factor. So what is the ideal age to do a transplant? Is before a significant iron overload has occurred, before significant organ damage has occurred. So children less than 5 years would be the best age to transplant. Up to 10 years is also acceptable. Beyond 10, we do it, but there may be a slightly increased risk of complications. And as you can see here, the class 1, that is the ones with having no risk factors, the event-free survival is very good. Whereas the class 3, this is an old slide, so this data doesn't hold true. Now, even class 3 with modifications in technique, the event-free survival is, say, much better than what we are seeing here. But still, there would be more complications expected. Now, there's always a dilemma between whether we should subject these children to a transplant, except maybe 5, 10, 15% mortality, versus what would be their survival without a transplant. A well-transfused, well-chelated child is expected to live beyond 40, 50 years. However, there is the problem of morbidity, which is not quantified in these studies. The repeated transfusions, spending 2 Sundays every month, lifelong in the hospital for transfusions, plus the endocrine problems, plus various other issues which may occur. Alloimmunization, the chance of getting a suitable cross-match sample, all increase as age increases. And doing a transplant late in life is not, as we've seen in the previous slide, doing it in the adults doesn't really give you very good results. So we always have to balance the immediate transplant, risk of mortality during transplant versus a risk of lifelong morbidity and death in the 30s, 40s because of some of the other complications. So this is always a dilemma, and any patient who goes through a or is evaluated for transplant is counseled regarding the same, and the choice is best left to the family. So we do recommend going for a transplant if a match sibling donor is available. This has also thrown up this debate a little wide open. Gene therapy is on the horizon, but I mean, it's still pretty far away. This paper published in 2018 in NEJM shows that those children undergoing gene therapy with lentiviral vector, those having a non-beta 0 phenotype. By that we mean a beta 0 phenotype is a phenotype where no beta chains are produced. A beta plus phenotype is a phenotype where the chains are reduced but still produced. Okay, so obviously a beta 0 phenotype would be a more severe phenotype than a beta plus phenotype. So 12 out of the 13 children in this study with a non-beta 0 phenotype achieved transfusion independence in a year's time, whereas 3 out of 9, 30% of those with a beta 0 phenotype also achieved transfusion independence. The others definitely had a significant reduction in the transfusion requirement. So this study demonstrated the proof that this is going to work, though there's a very long way to go, and maybe another 10 years or maybe longer before this comes into regular clinical practice. But this is it's a big ray of hope on the horizon for thalassemics. However, there are certain problems with this. Number one, that this requires what is necessary, what the process involves is harvesting the stem cells, transducing them with a lentiviral vector with the modified beta gene. The reinfusion into the patient requires that the existing marrow production is suppressed, and so this requires myeloablative conditioning. This would result in infertility in the patient. So that's one major risk factor with the current technique in which it is used. Secondly, in older patients with heavily iron overloaded livers, myeloablative conditioning may be risky. So there are techniques which are being attempted now to avoid using chemotherapy conditioning for such patients, but that's still a long way to go. There are a couple of agents, newer agents, which have been approved in adults. Luspatercept is an agent which enhances erythroid maturation. The mechanism is very complex. I would not be really be able to explain that. But based on this BELIEVE trial, which included 336 patients more than 18 years of age of transfusion-dependent thalassemia, 21% achieved a target of 33% reduction in transfusion requirement, and 11% achieved transfusion independence. So based on this study, US FDA has approved the use of luspatercept in adults. In children, we still don't know. It will take some time. Another agent on the horizon is mitapivat, which is an activator of RBC-specific pyruvate kinase. It is currently in use for patients or has achieved orphan drug status for treatment of pyruvate kinase deficiency. But it has also been tried in ongoing phase 2 trials in thalassemia, and preliminary results do indicate an encouraging use of this agent. So this is something which we will be looking for in the future. So to end, I would say that regular transfusions and iron chelation are cornerstones in the management of thalassemia. Iron overload being the major cause of morbidity and mortality should be prevented and treated appropriately and adequately. Early chelation from early childhood would prevent or reduce most of the complications, and it is not unusual now to see patients with a near normal iron profile in our situation. So well transfused, well chelated patients can have ferritins in 200, 300 range or even lower. So it's quite possible and achievable if we start early and do regular monitoring. And so again, we need a multidisciplinary management. We do need endocrinologists, we do need orthopedic surgeons, we do need liver specialists, and so on. Matched sibling bone marrow transplant is currently the only curative therapy, but there may be other therapies on the horizon. Thank you.
Dr. Deshpande, sir.
Thank you, Shailesh, for such a good lecture. Are there any questions?
There is one question regarding to be done with increased blood transfusion requirement.
I could not hear you. Sanjay, your voice was not very clear.
What is to be done? Yeah, what is to be done if there is increased blood transfusion requirement in a particular child? What all things can be done or looked for?
Okay, so measuring the transfusion volume each time is important. So that will help us detect whether there is a increase in the requirement. One of the reasons could be an alloimmunization. So one would need to do an extended cross match and see which blood would be the best suitable for the particular child. Those children having more than 200 ml per kg per year of red cell volume requirement may be candidates for splenectomy. Though splenectomy is something which we try to avoid in as much as possible, because now we know that splenectomy not only just increases the risk of infections, but it also increases the risk of pulmonary hypertension in later life. So, but that is one option that we would need to do. The other thing that happens, the reason for, as I said, the increased requirement are usually spleens which are very big in size. So the best thing for that would have been prevention. But what we can do is to add hydroxyurea for these kids in order to suppress the erythropoiesis slightly, and that may lead to reduction in spleen size along with adequate chelation, adequate transfusions. So if the spleen size reduces, then maybe the transfusion requirement can reduce.
There is another question by Dr. Jayant Joshi. He's saying, what is your feeling that that thalassemia new cases are decreasing over the years? What is your individual feeling? Hello? You're not audible. Not audible. You're not audible. Shailesh, you are not audible.
Hello, Shailesh, are you there?
Yes.
So try muting and
Hello.
unmuting again. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it okay now?
Yes.
No, we are seeing a lot. We still continue to see new cases, and unfortunately, really surprising is that it is coming even in well-to-do families, in people who have access to the best healthcare. So I think prevention and a serious effort needs to be made about screening all pregnant women for thalassemia mutation. I think that a universal screening probably would be a really useful thing to do. It's not very expensive, and considering that a lot of other tests are being done for prenatal evaluation, I think thalassemia should be included into one of, and the pregnant woman should undergo screening.
What is your opinion when it should be done, premarital or prenatal?
No,
Okay.
As I said, marital will have different implications in the sense that they would know the need for screening. It can be done either way. The logistics of it would need to be really checked. But as of now, as an immediate measure, I would think doing it compulsorily for all pregnant women should be done before we consider doing it on a universal scale at the marital level.
Okay.
So that would take time. That would take time. This would be an immediate intervention for all those undergoing antenatal screening. In addition to the routine screening, I think an HPLC can be added to that. It's hardly 300-400 rupees if done on a mass scale. So it's not really going to increase the cost either.
You don't, A2 estimation will also cause the same cost.
That's exactly HbA2 estimate. That's HPLC for HT.
Okay.
One of the activities I asked the role of thalidomide.
See, there is no real data on the use of thalidomide or lenalidomide or whatever is being used. Such drugs should be used in the context of a clinical trial, in a properly conducted clinical trial. And outside a clinical trial, it can cause serious problems. We have seen a lot of patients having pancytopenia, febrile neutropenia, fulminant liver failure, presenting in children who have received some of these agents. So definitely it is not a recommended drug. It should be, if at all it is to be used, it should be done in the context of a clinical trial.
Secondly, in spite of this super transfusion, hypertransfusion schedules, why the patients are not following them, and most of the thalassemics will be having disfigurement and all other complications because of the improper transfusion programs. So what is the reason?
Question for that is, what is the pre-transfusion hemoglobin that we should maintain? One of the attendees has asked.
Yes, so I highlighted that it should preferably be above 9. That is
So that is pre-transfusion.
That is a pre-transfusion hemoglobin. Pre-BT hemoglobin should be 9. Because then we can usually assure sufficient marrow suppression. If the hemoglobin drops below that for an extended period of time, then endogenous erythropoiesis is going to occur, and all the problems of marrow expansion and the cosmetic changes will occur. Those patients, those of our patients who really follow this diligently, have no changes, and they are not detected. I mean, you really cannot identify them separately as thalassemics. So that level of marrow suppression and is achievable if we transfuse adequately and maintain a suitable hemoglobin.
So this concept of marrow suppression is not in the, even many doctors don't have that concept. One of the aim of giving transfusion is a marrow suppression, and that may be one of the reason, or maybe the patient's fatigue. In spite of this transfusion methods available, still there is a 90%, more than 90% thalassemics are disfigured. What is your opinion?
No, the only reason for the disfigurement is, I mean, that indicates that the transfusion is inadequate. That is, so the time gap is, so most children who come to us having disfigurement are maintaining hemoglobins around 6.57 for occasional transfusion, and then they'll maintain about 9. But if you look at their entire 2 or 3 year record, you find that most of the hemoglobins are in the same range of 6.57, 7.5, and so on. So giving adequate
you can continue.
Giving adequate transfusion is a sure shot way of preventing these complications.
Okay,
so
one of our pediatricians,
some children have to increase.
One of the pediatricians has asked how many transfusions have on an average occurred in Pune, for example, in the last year or say last 5 years for thalassemia. I mean, how frequently is it done actually?
Transfusions per patient.
BMTs.
Oh, sorry, transplants. Transplants are common. Even in Pune, there are multiple centers doing it. At least about 4 or 5 centers who are doing transplants. Most of them do transplants for thal. Even we at Dinanath are doing it. The exact number may not be, I don't have this now, but I would say about 10 to 15% of all transplants in kids would be thalassemics.
Any comment on antenatal diagnosis? How to go about? What is the importance of diagnosing the primary case or the index case completely? Right.
So the first thing to do is to find out the mutation in the affected child. Okay, there are 2 ways of doing antenatal diagnosis. One, when there is already a child who is born and you want to do it for the subsequent pregnancy, you want to prevent a thalassemic birth. So in that case, you do the screening of the affected child first, identify the mutation. The first step is to we normally do is to identify, look at the 5 common mutations. If they are not detected, we do further studies to look at what exactly the mutation is. Then that mutation is identified in the either of the parents, both the parents, and subsequently they are offered a Cohen-Willis biopsy at about 12 weeks and to identify that mutation. In case this is the first time and both parents are having THAL trait, then do the similar process, identify what kind of mutations both of them have, and then do a CVB at 12 weeks to identify whether the baby is affected or not. In case there is a heterozygous mutation detected, the pregnancy is allowed to continue. However, if we find a double heterozygous or homozygous mutation, then an abortion is advised.
I think those are all the questions we have had on the chat box and the question answer. Dr. Kulkarni sir, can you just conclude?
Thank you very much, Shailesh, for such an elaborate and informative session on thalassemia, which we come across infrequently these days in practice. But very nice review of the current concepts in management of thalassemia, as well as the preventive options and the curative therapies as well. Thank you very much, Shailesh. Thank you, Deshpande sir. Thank you, everybody, on behalf of Pune IIP. Can we wind up the session now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We can stop sharing.
Thanks for giving me this opportunity.
And special thanks to Shailesh for preparing this in such a short, with such a short notice. Actually, thank you, Shailesh.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Piyush, I think we can end the session.
Hello. There's a broadcasting downga.
Piyush, can you just stop broadcasting?
You stop broadcasting, we can have a discussion. Broadcasting.
Hello, Piyush.
Yes, sir.
Can you just stop the broadcast and just continue the panelists for a few minutes?
Sure. You want me to take the video private?
Yeah.
Okay.
शैलेश समज झालं.
Thank you.
First class झालं.
पण नेट तुझं मध्ये मध्ये थाट राहतं.
हो मला काय कळत नाही. माझ्याकडे तीन नेटचे सोर्सेस ठेवलेले आहेत. म्हटलं एक नाही तर दुसरं. त्यातले 2 बॉम्ब एकदम गायबच झाले. एक चालतच नाही.
शैलेश, नॉट द राईट प्लेस, पण ते दुपारच्या पेशंट संदर्भात एक बोलायचं होतं. त्याच्या मेथड आपल्याला वापरता येईल का फॉर जिनोम एक्झोम सिक्वेन्सिंग? कारण इज बीन ट्रान्सफ्युज्ड.
तो हा म्हणतोय प्लास्टिक अनिमिया.
प्लास्टिक अनिमिया.
हो त्याचा वापरता येईल ना. ट्रान्सफ्युजन असं काही नाही.
म्हणजे ऍक्च्युअली मी ते मंडळींशी बोलत होतो, देवर की बाबा प्री ट्रान्सफ्युजन असेल तर बरं, नाही तर मग 2-3 आठवड्यांनी. पण त्यांची मी अगेन
आठवड्यांनी करता येईल. म्हणजे यू कॅन ऑलवेज डू इट लेटर, बट आय थिंक इट इज बेटर. कारण तेवढा वेळ जाणार माहिती का.
त्याच्या पुढे एक्झॉमला पुढे आणखीन 2-3 आठवडे
महिना लागणार एक्झॉमला
यायला. एक्झॉमचा रिझल्ट यायला महिना लागतो.
And she'll probably require another transfusion. ते 2-3 आठवडे होता.
हो.
Sir, we are private now.
Yeah, great. ओव्हरऑल चांगलं झालं सर. आता छान झालं.
अटेंडन्स चांगला होता आणि जवळपास 80 पर्यंत अटेंडन्स.
80 अटेंडन्स
80 होता. हो.
आणि हेही तसं शॉर्ट नोटीस वरच दिलं होतं. 2 दिवसातच सांगितलं होतं ना. त्यामुळे दॅट वॉज अ गुड अटेंडन्स.
एकदम क्रिस्प आणि शॉर्ट असल्यामुळे लोकांनी अटेंड केलं.
शैलेशचं प्रेझेंटेशनही छान आहे. व्हेरी नाईस.
थँक्यू.
शैलेश ते शेअर करता येईल का आमच्या पीजी साठी वगैरे?
हो, ईमेल करतो.
प्रेझेंटेशन पाठव ना. म्हणजे पीजी ला शेअर कर.
ईमेल करतो.
चालेल.
चलो
थँक्यू.
ओके, चलो
बाय. चलो देशपांडे सर बोलूया.
देशपांडे सर छान. थँक्यू.
देशपांडे सरांचं छान झालं आहे. एकदम मस्त सर. हो सर.
मला दुसरीकडे बोलायचं. मी 2 प्रोग्राम वरती आहे. आता रायपूरमध्ये आहे
आम्हाला
सध्या.
लिंक पाठवा, तिथेही येतो आम्ही. चौऱ्या
रायपूर-
ढाळायला येतो.
मी
चौऱ्या
रायपूरमध्ये पण
ढाळायला
आहे.
येतो.
आय मीन रायपूर राईट नाव. रायपूर संध्याकाळी
रायपूर.
मुंबईला आहे. संध्याकाळी
होय ना?
मुंबईला आहे.
काय राहतो पुण्यात पण विहरतो सगळीकडे. हा?
संचार सगळीकडे संचार.
उडते खासदार आहेत, उडते खासदार. हा?
तर रायपूरला एक चालू आहे कोविंद उदय. रायपूरचं चालू
होय.
आहे.
बर बर बर.
तिथे एक 2
कुलकर्णी
दिवस
सर,
दौरे चालू द्या, त्यांचे दौरे गरजेचे आहेत त्यांना.
हो.
पूर्व तयारी.
कुलकर्णी सर,
पण
आपलं-
मतदारसंघाकडे लक्ष राहू द्या म्हणाव. हा?
काय
म्हणून तर आज बॅटिंग
उद्या-
केली इकडे त्यांनी.
उद्या संध्याकाळी भेटायचंय का कुलकर्णी सर? तुमचं सगळं ठीक असेल तर घरामध्ये?
तुम्ही सांगाल तसं आम्हाला काही प्रॉब्लेम नाही. आम्ही बघू
तुमच्यावर
तेव्हा
परिस्थिती
नाही नाही, ठीक आहे, तसे काही प्रॉब्लेम नाहीये परिस्थिती.
आटोक्यात आली आहे ना?
हो हो
मग उद्या संध्याकाळचं
कुलकर्णी-
टेंटेटिव्ह
हो. चला
आपल्या
चला,
मोदी-
सरांना लॉग इन व्हायला फोन यायला लागलेला आहे. बंद करून टाका.
सर
नाही,
आपल्या
नाही.
मॉड्यूल बघा ना.
हो बघतो करतो फोन. हा येस.
हो चलो बोलूया आपण ग्रुपवर.
हो हो.
All right, sir. Ending the meeting.
या या.
चल. येस थँक्यू पियुष. थँक्स लॉट. अरे
All
पियुष,
right. हा सर बोला.
हॅलो.
हा बोला ना सर.
उद्या आपल्याला परत आहे.
हो.
टुमॉरो मॉर्निंग अगेन वी हॅव अ मीटिंग.
Yes, yes. I hope you received the link already.
9:50 ला स्टार्ट करूया आपण.
हो हो.
समन एल्स विल लुक आफ्टर.
काय म्हणता सर?
तुम्हीच असणार का कोणी दुसरं असणार आहे?
उद्या सकाळी 9 वाजता चिराग असेल सर.
चिराग असणार आहे का?
हो
ओके, मी मेसेज करून ठेवतो मग.
हो चालेल.
चाल या थँक्यू. याचं रेकॉर्डिंग असेल ना आपलं?
हो सर आहे ना.
शेअर इट, म्हणजे आम्ही आमच्या वेबसाईटवर पण हे करू.
सर हे आता लाईव्ह युट्यूबची लिंक पण आहेच माझ्याकडे.
ओके.
हेच पाठवतो मी
युट्यूबचं
आता
जर